The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest, delivered with the kind of theatrical cruelty that only comes from someone who's been rehearsing their moment of triumph. My father-in-law left us 7 houses in Miami Beach. Kinsley's voice rang through the law office like a victory bell, her manicured hands clutching the deed papers like trophies. Ella, oh, what a shame. You only got the old warehouse in Mississippi. The applause started immediately. Cousins I barely remembered. Distant relatives who'd crawled out of the woodwork the moment James's obituary hit the papers. Uncle Robert, who'd borrowed money from James for 30 years without ever paying it back. All of them clapping like Kinsley had just announced she'd won the lottery, which in their minds, she had. I sat in the leather chair beside the mahogany conference table, my weathered hands folded in my lap, watching my former daughter-in-law perform her victory dance with the precision of someone who'd been planning this moment for years. At 35, Kinsley moved through the world like someone who'd never been denied anything she wanted, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer dress probably costing more than most people's monthly rent. 7 mansions, she continued, holding up her phone to take a selfie with the deed papers. Waterfront properties, pool access, yacht slips, can you even believe it? More applause, more congratulations, more validation for the woman who'd spent the last 4 years treating me like an inconvenient relative who'd overstayed her welcome at every family gathering. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat diplomatically. Mrs. Monroe, if we could proceed with the rest of the will reading. Oh yes, of course, Kinsley said, not bothering to lower her voice or moderate her glee. I'm sorry, Ella. I didn't mean to get so excited about our inheritance. I know this must be difficult for you. Difficult, as if watching your ex-husband's family celebrate your apparent poverty was merely an inconvenience rather than a public humiliation. I looked across the table at my son, Dean, 40 years old, and sitting there like a statue carved from embarrassment and cowardice. His dark hair, so much like his father's, was perfectly styled, his expensive suit tailored to hide the softness that came from a lifetime of never having to do physical work. He wouldn't meet my eyes, just stared at his hands while his wife performed her one-woman show about inherited wealth. Dean, I said quietly, my voice cutting through Kinsley's continued celebration. You're awfully quiet. He finally looked up, and I saw something in his expression that broke my heart. Not grief for his father, not concern for my feelings, but shame. Shame that his mother had received what everyone in the room considered the consolation prize. Mom, he started, then trailed off, glancing at Kinsley as if seeking permission to speak. Dean's just overwhelmed, Kinsley answered for him, sliding back into her chair with the fluid grace of someone who'd never doubted her place at the head of any table. 7 properties is a lot to manage. We'll probably need to hire a property management company. Maybe buy a yacht to travel between them all. Uncle Robert laughed loudly. Kinsley, you better invite us to the housewarming parties, all 7 of them. Of course. We're thinking of having the first one next month. A real celebration of James's legacy. She turned to me with a smile that looked sympathetic, but felt predatory. Ella, you're welcome to come naturally. I know the warehouse isn't much, but maybe you could turn it into something useful, like a workshop? You were always so practical. Practical. The word she used when she meant poor, when she meant beneath her notice, when she meant someone who fixed things instead of buying new ones. I reached into my worn leather purse and pulled out the envelope containing my inheritance documents. The deed to a 40,000 square foot warehouse in Yazoo City, Mississippi. The building where James and I had spent countless weekends during our marriage, back when I was still trying to understand why he'd been so insistent about buying property in such an unremarkable place. A warehouse, Cousin Martha said with poorly concealed pity. Well, Ella, at least you'll have somewhere to store things. More laughter. More sympathetic looks from people who'd never offered sympathy when it might have been useful. I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting through 2 hours of legal proceedings and family theater. Everyone in the room fell silent, watching me with the kind of morbid curiosity usually reserved for traffic accidents. Mr. Henderson, I said, addressing the lawyer directly, is there anything else I need to sign? No, Mrs. Monroe. Your inheritance is straightforward. The warehouse, the surrounding 40 acres, and all mineral rights are transferred to you free and clear. Mineral rights. I noticed that phrase sailed right over everyone's heads, including Kinsley's. She was too busy mentally decorating her Miami mansions to pay attention to legal technicalities. I tucked the documents back into my purse, the same purse I'd carried for 15 years because it was well made and served its purpose. Unlike some things, I'd learned quality lasted longer than flash. "Well," I said, looking around the room at faces flushed with second-hand excitement about Kinsley's windfall. "Congratulations to everyone. I hope you all enjoy your good fortune." I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. Dean was looking at me now, finally, his expression a mixture of guilt and something that might have been concern. "Son," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet room. "You really don't know, do you?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kinsley's smile froze on her face like ice forming on a window. "Don't know what?" she asked, her voice higher pitched than usual. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved, and tried to prepare for a world that was more complicated than inherited wealth and Miami real estate. A world where appearances could be deceiving, where the most valuable things weren't always the most obvious ones, where a warehouse in Mississippi might be worth more than 7 mansions in Florida. "Don't know what, Mom?" Dean echoed, finally finding his voice. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd managed since James's funeral 3 weeks ago. Not a happy smile exactly, but the expression of someone who knew something that everyone else was about to learn the hard way. "Nothing, sweetheart. Nothing at all." I opened the door and walked out of the law office, leaving behind a room full of people who thought they knew exactly what James Monroe's final wishes had accomplished. Behind me, I could hear Kinsley's voice rising in pitch and volume, demanding answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. Let them celebrate their Miami mansions, I thought, as I walked to my 15-year-old Honda Civic. Let them plan their yacht parties and their property management companies, and their Instagram posts about inherited luxury. James had always been smarter than any of them realized, and in 45 minutes, when I was safely back in my modest apartment, I would open the sealed letter he'd left for me, the one Mr. Henderson had handed me along with the warehouse deed. The letter that would explain exactly why my ex-husband had chosen to give his grieving family exactly what they thought they wanted, while giving me exactly what I actually needed. Some gifts, I was learning, were more carefully planned than they appeared, and some warehouses in Mississippi were worth more than 7 mansions in Miami Beach, but that was a lesson for another day. Today, I just wanted to go home and read a dead man's final words to the woman who'd loved him long enough to understand that his greatest act of love might look like abandonment to everyone else. The drive home from the lawyer's office passed in a blur of Memphis traffic and churning thoughts. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my Honda Civic, 15 years old but meticulously maintained, much like everything else in my life since the divorce, while Kinsley's triumphant laughter echoed in my memory like fingernails on a chalkboard. 7 houses in Miami Beach. The words had been delivered with the kind of vindictive glee usually reserved for lottery winners, rubbing their fortune in the faces of people who'd bought losing tickets. I pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Gardens, the modest apartment complex I'd called home for the past 4 years. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because I'd learned to value substance over appearances, function over flash. The 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor had everything I needed: good bones, reliable plumbing, and neighbors who minded their own business. Mrs. Patterson from 3B was watering her balcony plants as I climbed the exterior stairs, and she waved with the casual friendliness of someone who knew me as the quiet woman in 3C, who always paid her rent early and never complained about noise. "How was your day, dear?" she called out, her voice carrying the genuine concern that came from small kindnesses between strangers. "Eventful," I replied, managing a smile. "James's will was read today." "Oh my! I hope everything went smoothly." If only she knew. As smoothly as these things ever go. Inside my apartment, I dropped my purse on the small dining table and stood in the silence that had become my constant companion since the divorce. Not the oppressive silence of loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of someone who'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being abandoned. The sealed envelope sat in my purse like a time bomb, James's careful handwriting spelling out my name in the script I'd known for 32 years. We'd met in college. Me, the scholarship kid from rural Mississippi studying civil engineering. Him, the business major whose family owned half of Memphis's commercial real estate. I'd fallen in love with his laugh, his curiosity about how things worked, his complete lack of awareness about his own privilege. I'd married him despite his money, not because of it. The divorce had been civilized, even friendly. 28 years of marriage ending not in hatred or betrayal, but in the quiet recognition that we'd grown into people who loved each other but couldn't live together anymore. James had needed constant motion, social events, business dinners with people who talked about quarterly profits over expensive wine. I'd needed space to think, to create, to exist, without performing the role of successful businessman's wife. We'd remained friends after the papers were signed. Awkward at first, then gradually finding a comfortable distance that let us share coffee occasionally without the weight of failed expectations crushing the conversation. I made myself a cup of tea, Earl Grey, the same brand I'd been drinking since graduate school, and settled into my reading chair by the window. The Memphis skyline glittered in the late afternoon light, a view I'd chosen specifically because it reminded me that cities were just engineering projects scaled up, problems solved with concrete and steel and careful planning. The envelope opened easily, revealing 3 pages of James's careful handwriting and a smaller sealed envelope marked, "Open after reading letter." "My dearest Ella," it began, and I could hear his voice in every word, the slight southern accent he'd never quite shaken, despite decades of business school and corporate meetings. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just endured what I suspect was a rather unpleasant performance from our family. Specifically from Kinsley, who has been practicing her victory speech for months, completely unaware that she's celebrating winning a game she doesn't understand." I paused, a laugh escaping despite myself. Even dead, James could read people with surgical precision. "Ella, I need you to know that everything I'm about to explain was planned with mathematical precision. Not as revenge. I'm not petty enough for that, despite what you might think about my final gift distribution. This is education. Brutal, expensive education that our son desperately needs if he's going to become a man instead of remaining a trust fund baby with good intentions." I sipped my tea and continued reading, feeling the familiar mixture of frustration and admiration that James had always inspired. He'd been the only person I'd ever known who could make questionable decisions seem like acts of wisdom if you squinted hard enough. "The Miami houses are beautiful, Ella. Absolutely gorgeous. Kinsley has been driving by them for 2 years, taking photos, planning renovations she couldn't afford. What she doesn't know, what none of them know, is that I bought those properties with leveraged financing specifically to create this moment." My engineering mind immediately started calculating debt-to-value ratios, mortgage payments, property taxes on 7 luxury homes, the numbers that Kinsley would discover when the celebrations ended and reality set in. The warehouse, on the other hand? Well, you remember the warehouse. You remember why I bought it, even though at the time you thought I was being sentimental about your hometown. I remembered. We'd been driving through Mississippi on our way to New Orleans for our 10th anniversary when I'd noticed the geological formations around Yazoo City. The limestone bedrock, the way the land sloped toward the river, the mineral deposits that suggested something valuable beneath the surface. I'd mentioned it casually, the way engineers notice things that other people miss, and James had surprised me by actually listening. "I know you, Ella. I know you're sitting there right now calculating mortgage payments and wondering how Dean is going to afford 7 Miami mansions on his current income. The answer is, he can't. Those houses will bankrupt him within 6 months unless he makes some very smart decisions very quickly. But you, my brilliant ex-wife, you're about to discover that your warehouse sits on something considerably more valuable than waterfront views and yacht slips." I set down the letter, my heart beating faster. James had always been good at surprises, but this felt different. This felt like the kind of surprise that changed everything. The smaller envelope contained a single key and an address I recognized, the law office of Patricia Hennings, the environmental lawyer who specialized in mineral rights and water resources, the same lawyer I'd met briefly at a professional conference 5 years ago, back when I was still consulting on engineering projects and she was presenting a paper on groundwater rights in the Mississippi Delta. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Dean's number appeared on the screen, and I considered letting it go to voicemail. But maternal instinct, even bruised maternal instinct, made me answer. "Mom?" His voice sounded strained, younger than his 40 years. "Are you okay? I mean, after today? With the will reading and everything?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you handling your inheritance?" "That's actually why I'm calling. Kinsley wants to drive down to Miami tomorrow to look at the properties. Start planning renovations, maybe hire an interior designer. She's already calling contractors about putting in infinity pools on properties that probably already had them, financed with debt that would swallow Dean's savings like quicksand. That sounds ambitious. Mom, I know today was awkward. The way Kinsley reacted, the things she said about your warehouse, she didn't mean to be cruel. Yes, she did. Kinsley had meant every calculated word, every dismissive gesture, every moment of public humiliation. But Dean wasn't ready to see that yet. "Son, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you know how much it costs to maintain 7 luxury properties in Miami Beach?" Silence on the other end of the line. Then, "We'll figure it out. Dad left us the houses free and clear, right? No mortgages?" Oh, my sweet, naive boy. "Did Mr. Henderson mention anything about existing liens or financing?" "I don't." Kinsley was handling most of the financial details. She's better with that stuff than I am. Kinsley, who'd majored in communications and whose idea of financial planning involved maxing out credit cards on designer handbags. Kinsley, who was about to discover that inheriting 7 mansions wasn't the same thing as being able to afford them. "Dean, I want you to do something for me. Before you sign anything, before you make any major decisions about those properties, have an accountant review all the financial obligations. Promise me." "Mom, why are you being so paranoid? Dad loved us. He wouldn't have left us something that would hurt us." I looked at James's letter, at his careful explanation of brutal education and necessary lessons, and realized that my ex-husband had understood our son better than Dean understood himself. "You're right, sweetheart. Your father loved you very much, more than you know." After we hung up, I sat in my chair watching the sun set over Memphis, thinking about warehouses and Miami mansions, about the difference between gifts and lessons, about the price of learning who you really are when everything you thought you wanted turns out to cost more than you can afford. Tomorrow, I would drive to Mississippi and unlock whatever secrets James had left buried beneath 40 acres of Delta soil. Tonight, I would mourn not just my ex-husband, but the innocence my son was about to lose when reality came calling on his Miami dreams. Some educations, I was learning, were more expensive than others, and some gifts were really just lessons wrapped in prettier paper. 18 months before James's death, the call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing blueprints for a water treatment facility in Jackson. My phone showed James's name, which was unusual. We typically communicated through text messages or brief, practical conversations about Dean's birthday gifts or holiday schedules. "Ella, do you have time to talk?" Not over the phone, in person. Something in his voice made me set down my coffee and pay attention. In the 4 years since our divorce, I'd heard James sound tired, frustrated, occasionally amused, but never this hollow. "Of course. Is everything all right? I need to meet somewhere private, away from Memphis, away from anywhere we might run into people we know." He paused, and I heard traffic noise in the background. "What about that cafe in Yazoo City? The one near the old warehouse?" The warehouse. We'd driven past it a dozen times over the years, that massive concrete structure sitting on 40 acres of Delta farmland like a monument to abandoned industry. James had bought it during our marriage, a whim, I'd thought then, though I'd provided the geological survey that had convinced him the land had potential. "The Magnolia Cafe? James, that's 3 hours from Memphis." "I know. Can you meet me there Thursday at 2? I agreed, more out of curiosity than concern. James had always been dramatic, prone to making simple conversations feel like international negotiations. But when I saw him 2 days later, sitting in a corner booth at the small-town cafe, with his shoulders curved inward and his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, I realized this wasn't drama. This was fear. "You look terrible," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. Always the engineer, straight to the point. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ella, I'm sick." The words hung between us like a diagnosis neither of us wanted to acknowledge. I studied his face, noting the subtle signs I'd missed during our occasional coffee meetings, The weight loss, the fatigue around his eyes, the careful way he moved like someone conserving energy. How sick? Heart, genetic cardiomyopathy. The doctors say I have maybe 2 years, probably less. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup like it was an anchor. I've known for 6 months. Been trying to figure out how to handle things. Things? Dean. Kinsley. The mess I've made of my son's life by giving him everything without ever teaching him the cost of anything. I leaned back against the worn vinyl booth, processing this information. James had always been a planner, someone who thought 5 moves ahead in every situation. If he was telling me about his diagnosis, it wasn't because he needed emotional support. It was because he needed something else. What do you want from me, James? I want you to help me save our son. He pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents, bank statements, property records, financial projections that made my engineering mind immediately start calculating ratios and risk assessments. Look at this, he said, spreading papers across the table between our coffee cups. Really look at it. The Miami properties, 7 luxury homes purchased over the past 18 months with financing that made my stomach clench. Each house was beautiful, expensive, and leveraged to the breaking point. The combined monthly carrying costs exceeded Dean's annual income by a factor of 3. James, what were you thinking? I was thinking about Kinsley. His voice carried a bitterness I'd rarely heard from him. Have you watched her lately, Ella? Really watched her? I had. At family gatherings, holiday dinners, the few occasions when our post-divorce politeness had put us in the same room. Kinsley moved through Dean's life like someone playing a role. The devoted wife, the loving daughter-in-law, the woman who just happened to know the exact value of every gift, every dinner, every gesture of affection. She doesn't love him, I said quietly. She loves the Monroe name. She loves the bank account, the social status, the idea of inheriting wealth she didn't earn. James's hands were shaking slightly as he organized the documents. I've been testing her, Ella. Little things at first, mentioning financial setbacks that didn't exist, talking about scaling back the business, suggesting we might need to be more careful with money. And she panics every time. She starts researching my assets online, asking Dean about inheritance timelines, making comments about how important it is to protect the family legacy. He looked up at me with eyes that held more pain than his physical diagnosis could account for. She's already planning my funeral, Ella. Not because she'll miss me, but because she's calculating what Dean will inherit when I'm gone. I studied the financial documents, using numbers to process emotions that felt too large and complicated for words. The Miami houses were beautiful traps, designed to appeal to Kinsley's desire for luxury while creating debt obligations that would destroy anyone who couldn't see past the surface glamour. You bought these properties knowing they'd bankrupt Dean. I bought them knowing they'd reveal Kinsley's true priorities and force Dean to make choices about the kind of man he wants to be. James, that's... I searched for the right word. Cruel. No, Ella. Cruel is letting our son marry a woman who sees him as a trust fund with legs. Cruel is dying quietly and leaving him defenseless against someone who's been systematically isolating him from family and friends while positioning herself to inherit everything we built. He pulled out another set of documents, these ones bearing my signature from 28 years ago. Geological surveys, mineral rights assessments, water table analyses, all the technical work I'd done when James had insisted on buying 40 acres of apparently worthless Mississippi farmland. You remember this? Of course I remember. You thought I was crazy for seeing potential in empty land. You weren't crazy, Ella. You were right, as always. He spread out updated geological reports, environmental impact studies, corporate contracts that made my breath catch in my throat. That warehouse sits on one of the purest groundwater sources in the Mississippi Delta. I've spent the last year negotiating mineral rights and water extraction contracts with 3 major corporations. The numbers on the contracts were staggering. Millions in guaranteed annual royalties, with escalation clauses that would increase the payments over time. Clean, renewable income that would continue for decades. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm going to leave the warehouse to you. All of it. The land, the building, the mineral rights, the corporate contracts, everything. I stared at him across the small cafe table, understanding finally dawning. You want Kinsley to think she won. You want her to celebrate inheriting 7 mansions while I get the warehouse that everyone will see as worthless. I want Dean to learn the difference between wealth and debt, between assets and liabilities, between someone who loves him and someone who loves his money. James reached across the table and took my hand. And I want you to be there to catch him when he falls. James, you're the only person who ever loved our family without wanting anything in return. You're the only one who'll help Dean rebuild his life based on character instead of inheritance. His grip tightened. Will you do this? Will you let me give you the warehouse and everything that comes with it? I looked at the contracts, the geological reports, the evidence of James's elaborate plan to educate our son through controlled financial disaster. It was manipulative, complex, and probably the most loving thing James had ever done as a father. What if Dean never forgives me for having what he needed? Then he's not the man I raised him to be. But Ella, if I know our son, and I do know him, underneath all of Kinsley's influence, he'll figure it out. Maybe not immediately, maybe not easily, but eventually he'll understand that sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is the opportunity to prove what you're really made of. I agreed that day, sitting in a small cafe in Mississippi while my ex-husband planned his final act of love disguised as betrayal. I signed documents, made promises, and accepted the responsibility of catching our son when he fell. I just hadn't realized how hard the fall would be, or how long it would take him to hit the ground. But that was still months away, on a day when Kinsley would celebrate 7 Miami mansions, while I walked away with a warehouse that everyone else would see as a consolation prize. Some gifts, I was learning, were worth waiting for, and some plans were too complex to explain until the consequences made the lessons impossible to ignore. 12 months before James's death, the geology lab at the University of Mississippi looked exactly like every testing facility I'd worked with during my consulting years. Fluorescent lights, stainless steel equipment, and the particular smell of precision instruments and scientific discovery. Dr. Sarah Williams, the hydrogeologist I'd contacted through my professional network, spread the water samples and soil cores across the analysis table like evidence in a case that would change everything. Ella, these readings are remarkable, she said, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed the spectral analysis results. The aquifer beneath your Mississippi property shows mineral content and purity levels that rival some of the most valuable water sources in the world. I stood beside her, my engineer's mind processing the implications, while my heart raced with the confirmation of what James and I had suspected. The warehouse property wasn't just sitting on good water, it was sitting on liquid gold. What kind of commercial viability are we talking about? Premium bottled water, industrial applications, pharmaceutical-grade processing. This aquifer could support multiple extraction operations simultaneously without depleting the source. Dr. Williams pulled up computer models showing flow rates and recharge patterns. Conservatively, you're looking at sustainable extraction rates that would generate millions annually in licensing fees alone. Millions. James had been right, as usual. But then, James had always been good at seeing potential where others saw empty land and abandoned buildings. My phone buzzed with a text from him. Lab results in yet? Meet me at the warehouse at 4 p.m. Time to see our gold mine. The drive from Oxford to Yazoo City took me through Mississippi Delta country that most people saw as endless flat farmland punctuated by small towns that time had forgotten. But I'd grown up in this landscape, had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated valuable resources beneath surfaces that looked unremarkable to outsiders. James was already waiting when I arrived at the warehouse, his black BMW looking incongruous against the rural setting. He'd lost more weight since our cafe meeting, and I noticed he moved with the careful deliberation of someone managing pain and conserving energy. "Good news or bad news?" he asked as I got out of my Honda. "Extraordinary news. Dr. Williams says the aquifer could support multiple commercial operations." I handed him the lab reports. "James, this property could generate more annual income than your entire real estate portfolio." Could or will? Will. I've already had preliminary conversations with corporate water divisions at 3 major companies. They're all interested in long-term extraction contracts. James smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness I'd seen from him since his diagnosis. "Show me." We walked the property together, me explaining the geological formations that indicated groundwater flow, him asking questions with the focused intensity that had made him successful in business. The warehouse itself was massive, but unremarkable, a concrete structure that could house manufacturing operations or storage facilities. But beneath our feet lay something infinitely more valuable. The beauty of this, I explained, stopping at a point where the land sloped slightly toward a natural depression, is that it's renewable. Unlike oil or gas extraction, responsible water harvesting actually helps maintain aquifer health. We could generate income from this land for decades without depleting the resource. I caught the pronoun slip. The unconscious return to thinking of James and myself as a team despite 4 years of divorce. This is your property, your plan. No, Ella, this is our plan now, our son's future. He pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. I need you to understand what I'm asking of you. The papers outlined a complex estate structure designed to transfer ownership of the warehouse and all mineral rights to me upon James's death, while the Miami properties would go directly to Dean. But the real complexity lay in the corporate contracts, licensing agreements with Nestlé Waters, Coca-Cola, and Danone that would begin generating income the moment extraction operations started. You've already negotiated the corporate deals? I've been working on this for 8 months, Ella. Using shell companies, environmental lawyers, water rights specialists, the contracts are signed and sealed, just waiting for ownership transfer to activate them. I studied the financial projections, my engineering mind automatically calculating cash flow, operational costs, and long-term sustainability. The numbers were staggering. Guaranteed annual royalties starting at $2.3 million, with escalation clauses that would increase payments based on extraction volume and commodity pricing. James, this is... I struggled to find words adequate to the scope of what he was showing me. This is generational wealth. This could support Dean's family for the rest of their lives. If Dean learns to value sustainable assets over flashy liabilities, if he discovers the difference between earning wealth and inheriting debt, if he figures out that sometimes the most valuable things look unremarkable on the surface. The plan was becoming clearer and more brutal, as James explained the carefully orchestrated financial education he'd designed for our son. The Miami properties would drain Dean's resources, force him to make hard decisions about debt and priorities, reveal Kinsley's true motivations when luxury became a liability instead of an asset. What if he can't handle it? What if the pressure destroys him instead of teaching him? Then I was wrong about the man I raised, and you'll be there to help him rebuild from whatever's left. James looked out across the 40 acres that would become my inheritance. But Ella, I don't think I'm wrong. Dean has good instincts underneath all the privilege and enabling. He just needs circumstances that force him to use them. We spent the afternoon walking the property, James recording a detailed video explanation of his plan using his phone camera. He wanted documentation, he explained, that would make his intentions clear if anyone ever questioned his mental capacity or decision-making process. My name is James Patrick Monroe, he said, speaking directly into the camera while standing beside the warehouse. I am 71 years old, in full possession of my mental faculties, and I am documenting my estate planning decisions for the benefit of my family and legal representatives. He explained the financial reality of the Miami properties, the sustainable wealth represented by the Mississippi aquifer, his concerns about Dean's marriage to Kinsley, and his faith that eventual hardship would reveal true character in everyone involved. I am leaving the warehouse property to my ex-wife, Ella Monroe, because she discovered its value, because she has the technical expertise to manage its development responsibly, and because she is the only person I trust to help my son when he needs help most. The video recording took 2 hours, with James explaining every financial detail, every legal consideration, every hope and fear that had motivated his decisions. When he finished, we sat on the warehouse loading dock, watching the sun set over Delta farmland that looked ordinary, but held extraordinary potential. Are you sure about this, James? Once the will is read, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything. He handed me a sealed envelope marked with my name. Don't open this until after the will reading. But Ella, when that day comes, remember that everything I've done was motivated by love. Love for Dean, love for the family we built together, even love for you. James, you saved me once, Ella. When we were young and I was too arrogant to see past my own privilege, you taught me to look deeper, to value substance over appearance, to build things that lasted instead of just buying things that impressed people." He stood up slowly, fatigue evident in every movement. "Now I need you to save our son the same way." Driving home that evening, I carried with me the weight of James's plan, the sealed letter that would explain everything after his death, and the knowledge that in less than a year, I would inherit wealth beyond anything I'd ever imagined. But more than that, I carried the responsibility of catching Dean when he fell, of helping him discover who he really was when everything he thought he wanted turned out to cost more than he could afford. Some inheritances, I was learning, came with obligations that lasted longer than the assets themselves, and some plans required more faith than fear, more love than logic, more patience than most people possessed. But James had always been good at seeing potential in unlikely places. He'd seen it in me 32 years ago. Now he was betting everything that he'd see it in our son when the test finally came. The sealed letter lay on my kitchen table like a loaded weapon I wasn't sure I was ready to fire. 2 days had passed since the will reading. 2 days of watching social media posts from Miami as Kinsley documented her inheritance with the enthusiasm of someone who'd won the lottery and intended to spend every penny as publicly as possible. Instagram stories of champagne toasts, Facebook posts about blessed beyond measure, TikTok videos of her dancing through empty mansions while upbeat music played over captions like, "From small town girl to Miami beach queen, inherited, blessed, living my best life." Meanwhile, Dean had called 3 times, each conversation shorter and more strained than the last. He was trying to navigate between his wife's celebration and his mother's apparent disappointment, caught in the middle of a situation he didn't understand and wasn't equipped to handle. I poured myself a glass of the wine James used to bring when he visited, a modest Pinot Grigio from a vineyard we'd discovered during our honeymoon in California, and finally opened the envelope that would explain everything. "My dearest Ella, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just endured what I imagine was a rather spectacular performance from our extended family. Kinsley has probably posted 17 photos of Miami beach houses by now, and Dean is probably wondering why his father left his mother with what everyone thinks is a worthless warehouse. First, let me say this clearly. I am proud of you. Proud of the woman you became after our divorce. Proud of the way you rebuilt your life on your own terms. Proud of the fact that you never needed my money to prove your worth to anyone. Second, let me explain why I needed you to experience today's humiliation before you could understand today's gift. Ella, our son has never failed at anything important. Not really. Every disappointment in his life has been cushioned by wealth. Every mistake has been corrected by resources. Every consequence has been delayed by privilege. He's 40 years old, and he's never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. He's never had to sacrifice something he wanted for something he needed. He's never had to discover what he's actually made of when everything easy is taken away. More importantly, he's never had to see Kinsley without the protection of financial security. He's never seen what she becomes when luxury is threatened, when social status is in jeopardy, when the Monroe name stops opening doors and starts creating debt obligations. The Miami houses are beautiful, Ella. They're also financial disasters. 7 luxury properties with combined monthly carrying costs of $95,000. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities. I've calculated every expense down to the landscaping bills. Dean's current income covers maybe 60% of those costs. The rest will come from his savings, which will last approximately 6 months if he tries to maintain all 7 properties. After that, he'll have to start making choices, hard choices, adult choices, the kind of choices that reveal character instead of just testing credit scores. Meanwhile, you'll be sitting on the most valuable water rights in Mississippi, generating more monthly income than all 7 Miami houses combined, completely debt-free, with a sustainable resource that will appreciate for decades. But here's the crucial part, Ella. Dean doesn't know that yet. And he won't know until he's had time to learn what financial pressure feels like, what it means to be married to someone who loves status more than stability, what it costs to maintain appearances when you can't afford the reality behind them. I need you to wait. I need you to let him fall. Not because I want him to suffer, but because he needs to understand that the safety net was never the money. It was always the people who loved him enough to catch him when he fell. When that day comes, And it will come. You'll be there. Not as his wealthy mother rescuing him from consequences, but as the woman who taught me to look deeper, to value substance over surface, to build things that lasted instead of buying things that impressed people. The corporate contracts are already signed and sealed. Nestlé, Coca-Cola, Danone, they're all waiting for you to activate the extraction agreements. The first quarterly payment will arrive within 90 days of my death. $2.3 million, with automatic increases built into every contract. Use the money wisely. Use it to help Dean rebuild his life based on character instead of inheritance. Use it to show Kinsley what real wealth looks like. Not 7 mortgaged mansions, but sustainable resources managed by someone who understands the difference between assets and liabilities. And Ella, use some of it for yourself. Buy something frivolous. Take a vacation. Live a little. You've spent 68 years taking care of everyone else. It's time someone took care of you. I love you. I always did. The divorce didn't change that. It just changed the form. You were my greatest teacher, my closest friend, and the woman who made me want to be worthy of the love you gave so freely. Our son will understand eventually. When the phone calls stop coming, when the credit cards are maxed out, when Kinsley shows him who she really is, that's when he'll remember the lessons you tried to teach him about character and integrity, and choosing substance over style. Until then, enjoy your warehouse. Enjoy your water rights. Enjoy watching our son discover what he's really made of when everything he thought he wanted turns out to cost more than he can afford. With all my love and gratitude, James P.S. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Yazoo City. Box 247. Inside, you'll find the original corporate contracts, geological surveys, and a bottle of champagne I've been saving for the day you finally got everything you deserved. Open it when Dean comes home. I read the letter 3 times, my emotions cycling through grief, admiration, frustration, and something that might have been relief. James had orchestrated all of this, the public humiliation, the apparent inequality, the family celebration of what they thought was his final judgment on our relative worth. But he'd also orchestrated my rescue. Not just financial rescue, but the kind of vindication that would prove to everyone who'd ever underestimated me that their assessment had been catastrophically wrong. My phone rang. Dean's number again. "Mom, I just wanted to check on you. I know today was hard, with the will reading and everything. How are you handling your inheritance, sweetheart?" "It's overwhelming. Kinsley's already hired an interior designer for 3 of the houses. She wants to start renovations next month, maybe throw a big party to celebrate." His voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there during the will reading. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Did Dad ever mention anything about the costs of maintaining those properties? Like monthly expenses, property taxes, that kind of thing?" I felt my heart clench for my son, who was beginning to glimpse the mathematical reality behind his windfall. "Did you ask the estate lawyer about ongoing financial obligations?" I tried to, but Kinsley said she'd handle all the financial planning. She's good with numbers, and she's excited about the opportunity to really make these properties shine. He paused. "But Mom, I looked up property taxes on Miami Beach last night. For just one house, the annual taxes are more than I make in 3 months. And you have 7 houses. 7 houses," he repeated, and I heard the first crack in his voice, the first recognition that gifts could sometimes be more expensive than anyone anticipated. "Dean, I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Before you sign any renovation contracts or take on any additional debt, have an accountant review all the financial obligations. Promise me you'll understand exactly what you're committing to before you commit to it." "Mom, why do you sound like you know something I don't?" I looked at James's letter, at his careful explanation of controlled financial education and necessary life lessons, and realized that my ex-husband had understood our son better than Dean understood himself. "I know that your father loved you more than you realize, and I know that sometimes the most expensive lessons are also the most valuable ones." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment holding the key to a safety deposit box that contained contracts worth millions of dollars, while 40 miles away in his expensive house, my son was probably calculating property taxes and wondering why his inheritance suddenly felt more like a burden than a blessing. Some gifts, I was learning, came with instructions that weren't immediately obvious. But eventually, if you were patient and observant and willing to learn from your mistakes, the lessons became clear. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the people who loved you most were waiting to catch you when you finally understood the difference between what you wanted and what you actually needed. 3 weeks after the will reading, I was reviewing geological surveys at my kitchen table when Dean's panicked phone call shattered my quiet evening. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." His voice carried a strain I hadn't heard since he was 12 and had accidentally broken the neighbor's window with a baseball. But this wasn't childhood mischief. This was adult terror. "What's wrong, sweetheart? How much do you know about Dad's financial situation? Before he died, I mean. His real financial situation." I set down the water rights documentation I'd been reviewing, my engineer's mind immediately calculating the implications of his question. 3 weeks was exactly how long it would take for someone to receive the first quarterly property tax assessments on 7 Miami Beach mansions. "Dean, what's happened?" "The bills, Mom. Jesus Christ, the bills." His voice cracked slightly. "Property taxes on 7 houses, not for the year, just for this quarter, come to $218,000. $218,000, Mom. That's more than I make in a year." I closed my eyes, remembering James's careful calculations, his mathematical precision in designing this moment of revelation. "Have you talked to Kinsley about this?" "Kinsley says not to worry. She says rich people always find ways to handle property taxes, that Dad must have had accountants and financial advisors who manage this stuff." His laugh was bitter and sharp. "She's hired 3 more interior designers and ordered custom furniture for the beach house. $40,000 for a dining room set because we need to live up to the property's potential. And the mortgage payments? That's the other thing. Dad didn't leave us these houses free and clear. There are mortgages on 6 of them, with combined monthly payments of," I heard papers rustling, "$73,000 a month. $73,000 monthly, plus property taxes, plus insurance, plus maintenance costs on 7 luxury properties that required constant upkeep to maintain their value." James hadn't just given Dean houses, he'd given him a financial time bomb with a very short fuse. "Dean, how long can you afford to maintain those obligations?" 4 months. Maybe 5 if I liquidate my retirement accounts and max out every credit card I can qualify for. The desperation in his voice was growing more pronounced. "Mom, I think Dad made a mistake. I think the lawyers screwed something up because there's no way he would have left me with this kind of debt burden." "Oh, my sweet boy. Your father made exactly the decisions he intended to make. Have you considered selling some of the properties?" "Kinsley won't hear of it. She says selling would be betraying Dad's vision and abandoning the family legacy. She's already planning a 4th of July party at the main house, invited 200 people, hired caterers." His voice was rising toward hysteria. "Mom, she ordered an ice sculpture that cost $8,000. $8,000 for frozen water that's going to melt in 4 hours. I thought about my own inheritance, sitting 90 miles away in a seemingly worthless warehouse, generating more monthly income than Dean's 7 mansions combined. But James had been right about the timing. Dean needed to understand the weight of his burden before he could appreciate the lightness of real financial security. "Dean, what do you need from me?" "I need to know if Dad ever mentioned anything about backup plans, emergency funds, additional assets that aren't in the will. Anything that might help me figure out how to handle this." The safety deposit box key sat in my jewelry drawer, surrounded by the corporate contracts that would solve all of Dean's financial problems instantly. But opening that box now would deprive him of the education James had designed, would prevent him from learning the difference between earned security and inherited debt. "Son, your father was always careful with money. If he left you those properties, he believed you could handle them. But what if I can't? What if I'm not smart enough or strong enough or whatever enough to manage this kind of responsibility?" The vulnerability in his voice broke my heart, but I forced myself to remember James's letter, his careful explanation of necessary lessons and controlled failures. "Dean, what does Kinsley say when you express these concerns to her?" "She tells me I'm being negative. That successful people don't focus on problems, they focus on opportunities, that I need to think bigger and embrace abundance." His laugh was hollow. Yesterday, she suggested we take out additional loans against the properties to fund renovations that would maximize our lifestyle potential. More debt, more leverage, more commitment to a financial structure that was already beyond Dean's ability to sustain. Kinsley wasn't just failing to help, she was actively accelerating his financial destruction. Dean, I want you to do something for me. I want you to sit down with Kinsley and have a serious conversation about selling at least 4 of the properties. Use the proceeds to pay off the mortgages on the remaining 3 and create a sustainable financial situation. She'll never agree to that. Why not? Because... He paused, and I could almost hear him processing the implications of his own words. Because she's already told everyone about the 7 houses, posted pictures on social media, bragged to her friends, used them as proof that she married into real money. Selling any of them would be admitting that we can't afford to maintain them. And how do you feel about that reasoning? I feel like I'm drowning, Mom. I feel like I inherited an anchor disguised as a life preserver, and my wife is telling me to dive deeper instead of swimming toward shore. The analogy was more accurate than Dean realized. James had indeed given him an anchor. 7 anchors, actually, each one heavy enough to drag him under if he couldn't figure out how to cut himself free. Dean, what would happen if you made this decision without Kinsley's agreement? If you simply decided that financial survival was more important than maintaining appearances? He was quiet for a long time. I don't know. We've never disagreed about anything major before. She usually handles all the big decisions, and I just go along with whatever she thinks is best. Because her judgment has been so reliable in other areas? What do you mean? I thought about the $40,000 dining room set, the $8,000 ice sculpture, the 3 interior designers working simultaneously on properties that couldn't generate enough rental income to cover their basic carrying costs. I mean that someone who spends $40,000 on furniture while you're calculating whether you can afford property taxes might not have the financial judgment required to manage a 7-property portfolio. Mom, are you saying Kinsley doesn't understand money? I'm saying that understanding money and being excited about spending money are 2 very different skill sets. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment thinking about the difference between teaching and rescuing, between helping someone learn and enabling someone to avoid learning. James had designed Dean's inheritance to be educational, but education required letting students make mistakes and experience consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, a photo of Kinsley raising a champagne glass in what appeared to be a very expensive restaurant, with a caption that read, "Celebrating the Monroe Legacy. Miami, Chuck living, just blessed." The photo had been tagged with Dean's name, but he wasn't in the frame. He was probably home, calculating debt service payments and trying to figure out how to afford the lifestyle his wife was broadcasting to the world. Some lessons, I realized, were harder to learn than others. Some teachers had to watch their students struggle with problems that had obvious solutions, waiting for the moment when help would be education rather than enablement. And some inheritances came with instructions that required more courage than money, more wisdom than wealth, more love than logic. James had been right about one thing. Our son was about to discover what he was really made of when everything he thought he wanted turned out to cost more than he could afford. The question was whether he would learn those lessons quickly enough to save himself, or whether he would need to lose everything before he understood the difference between assets and liabilities. Either way, I would be here when he was ready to rebuild his life based on character instead of inheritance. Some safety nets, after all, were worth waiting to deploy. The confrontation came on a humid Thursday afternoon in July when Kinsley arrived at my apartment building without calling, her face flushed with the kind of rage that comes from watching carefully constructed plans collapse in real time. I saw her through my living room window, marching across the parking lot in designer heels that were completely impractical for Memphis pavement, clutching her oversized purse like a weapon. The Maserati she was driving, a recent purchase to match their new lifestyle, sat in a visitor space with the engine still running. The doorbell rang with sharp, insistent bursts that suggested someone who'd moved past polite social conventions into pure desperation. "Ella, we need to talk," Kinsley announced the moment I opened the door, pushing past me into my modest living room without waiting for an invitation. "This has gone far enough." She looked around my apartment with the kind of assessment I'd seen her use at garage sales, cataloging, evaluating, dismissing most of what she saw as unworthy of her attention. Her gaze lingered on my second-hand furniture, my small television, my collection of engineering textbooks arranged on simple wooden shelves. "Kinsley, what can I do for you? You can stop pretending you don't know what's happening." She turned to face me, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the stress fractures around her eyes. "Dean is talking about selling 5 of the Miami properties. 5 of them, Ella. Do you understand what that means? It means he's trying to create a sustainable financial situation. It means he's giving up. It means he's letting James's legacy get carved up and sold off because he doesn't have the vision to see the bigger picture." Kinsley began pacing my small living room like a caged animal. "Those houses represent everything James worked for, everything the Monroe family stands for. They're not just properties. They're symbols of success." I settled into my reading chair, the same one I'd owned for 15 years, and studied my former daughter-in-law with the detached curiosity of an engineer examining a structural failure in progress. "Kinsley, what do you think James's primary concern was when he planned his estate?" "Preserving the family wealth, maintaining the Monroe reputation, making sure his legacy lived on through the properties and investments he'd built over a lifetime of hard work. And if those properties are bankrupting his son, they're not bankrupting anyone." The words exploded out of her with enough force to make my neighbor's dog start barking through the thin walls. "Rich people don't go bankrupt from owning too many houses. They find ways to make it work. They take out loans, they leverage assets, they think creatively about solutions. How much creative thinking have you done about generating $73,000 in monthly mortgage payments?" Kinsley's face went pale beneath her foundation. "How do you know about the mortgage payments?" "Dean told me. He's been calling every few days, asking for advice about managing the financial obligations James left him. Those are private family matters. Dean shouldn't be discussing our finances with anyone, even you." "Even his mother?" "Even his mother, who received a worthless warehouse while we inherited valuable real estate that requires sophisticated management strategies." I almost smiled at that. Sophisticated management strategies. From a woman whose idea of financial planning involved maxing out credit cards to fund ice sculptures. "Kinsley, tell me about these sophisticated strategies." She straightened her shoulders, adopting the confident posture she used when explaining things to people she considered intellectually inferior. "We're exploring several options. Additional financing against the properties to fund renovations that will increase their rental value. Corporate partnerships with luxury vacation rental companies, maybe selling a few properties at significant profits and using the proceeds to develop the remaining ones into even more valuable assets." I listened to her recite what sounded like talking points from late-night real estate infomercials, watching her face grow more animated as she convinced herself that debt could be transformed into wealth through creative thinking and positive attitude. "And if those strategies don't work, they'll work. They have to work." Kinsley stopped pacing and fixed me with the kind of stare she probably thought was intimidating. "But Ella, there's something you need to understand. Dean is starting to listen to negative influences. People who don't understand wealth, who are scared of taking big risks for big rewards. People like me. People like you." She moved closer, her voice dropping to the conspiratorial tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while saying unreasonable things. "I know you mean well, but you've never operated at this level of financial complexity. You've never managed multiple properties or dealt with the kind of tax strategies and investment opportunities that come with real wealth. You're right. I've never owned 7 mortgaged mansions that cost more to maintain than they generate in income." "Ah, see? You're thinking small. You're focused on monthly cash flow instead of long-term asset appreciation and lifestyle maximization." Kinsley pulled out her phone and began scrolling through photos. "Look at what we're building, Ella. Look at the life we're creating." The photos were impressive, I had to admit. Beautifully decorated rooms, infinity pools reflecting Miami sunsets, parties with attractive people holding expensive drinks in stunning settings. It looked like the lifestyle magazines that Kinsley had been reading religiously for the past 5 years. "It's very beautiful," I said honestly. "How much is it costing?" "Investment requires capital expenditure. You can't build wealth without spending money to maximize asset potential." She swiped to another photo, a catered party on what appeared to be a yacht. "This is what success looks like, Ella. This is what James wanted for his family. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of iced tea and the folder I'd been preparing for this conversation. "Kinsley, can I show you something?" "What?" I opened the folder and spread out financial projections, debt service calculations, and cash flow analyses that I'd prepared using the same engineering precision I'd once applied to infrastructure projects. "These are the real numbers for your 7 Miami properties. Monthly carrying costs, annual property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, everything required to maintain them at the level you're posting on social media." Kinsley glanced at the papers dismissively. "Numbers can be manipulated to support any conclusion. Successful people focus on possibilities, not limitations." "Kinsley, based on Dean's current income and your current spending rate, you'll be bankrupt within 4 months. That's ridiculous. 4 months. And that's assuming you stop all non-essential spending today and don't take on any additional debt. You don't understand how wealth works, Ella. Rich people don't worry about monthly cash flow. They think in terms of equity, appreciation, long-term value creation. Rich people also understand the difference between assets and liabilities," I interrupted, "between income-producing investments and debt-financed lifestyle purchases." "What's that supposed to mean?" I pulled out another set of documents, the geological surveys and water rights assessments that James had commissioned for the Mississippi warehouse property. "It means that sometimes the most valuable things don't look valuable to people who only understand surface appearances." Kinsley leaned over the papers, her expression shifting from dismissiveness to confusion to something approaching panic as she realized what she was reading. These are mineral rights assessments for your warehouse property, groundwater extraction rights specifically, for one of the purest aquifer sources in the Mississippi Delta. I don't understand what this means." "It means that my worthless warehouse sits on top of water rights worth approximately $8 million annually in licensing fees." The color drained completely from Kinsley's face. "That's not possible." I pulled out the corporate contracts, Nestlé, Coca-Cola, Danone, each one bearing signatures and dates that proved their authenticity. $2.3 million in quarterly royalty payments, starting 90 days after James's death. Renewable contracts with automatic escalation clauses. $8 million annually? Kinsley's voice was barely a whisper. More than your 7 Miami houses could generate in rental income, even if they were debt-free and fully occupied year-round. She stared at the contracts, her hands shaking slightly as she processed the magnitude of what I was showing her. James knew about this. He knew when he wrote the will. James commissioned the geological surveys. He negotiated the corporate contracts. He understood exactly what he was giving each of us. But that means... She looked up at me with the expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality were collapsing in real time. That means you're wealthy. Really wealthy. I'm financially secure in a way that doesn't depend on borrowed money or unsustainable debt service. Kinsley sat down heavily in my second-hand chair, the fight going out of her like air from a punctured balloon. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let everyone think you got the worthless inheritance? Because Dean needed to learn the difference between wealth and debt, between assets that generate income and liabilities that consume it, between someone who loves him and someone who loves his money. I love Dean. Do you? Or do you love the lifestyle you thought his inheritance would provide? She was quiet for a long time, staring at the contracts that proved her assumption about James's final judgment had been catastrophically wrong. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of desperation I'd never heard before. What happens now? Now, you and Dean decide whether you want to build a life based on financial reality or continue pursuing lifestyle fantasies that will destroy everything James actually left behind. And if we choose wrong? I looked at this young woman who'd spent 5 years treating me like an embarrassment to the Monroe family name, who'd celebrated my apparent poverty with such theatrical enthusiasm, who was now discovering that her understanding of wealth had been as shallow as her understanding of character. If you choose wrong, you'll learn what it actually costs to maintain 7 mortgaged mansions when you don't have the income to support them. And you'll just watch us fail? I'll be here when Dean is ready to learn the lessons his father tried to teach him. Whether you're part of that learning process or part of what he needs to learn from, that's up to you. As Kinsley left my apartment, her designer heels clicking against the pavement with less confidence than they'd carried when she'd arrived. I realized that James's plan was working exactly as he'd intended. The education was brutal, but it was thorough. And sometimes, the most expensive lessons were also the most valuable ones. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late August, jolting me from the deepest sleep I'd had in weeks. Dean's name glowed on my phone screen, and I knew without answering that the education James had designed had reached its inevitable conclusion. "Mom?" His voice was raw, broken in a way I hadn't heard since he was 8 years old and his pet hamster had died. "I'm sorry to wake you, but I need help." "Where are you?" "Sitting in my car outside the bankruptcy attorney's office. I have an appointment in 6 hours. His laugh was hollow, desperate. "Turns out you can't leverage your way out of debt when you don't have any actual assets to leverage." I pulled on my robe and walked to my kitchen, making coffee while Dean told me about the past month, the cascade of financial failures that had consumed everything he'd thought he owned. "We lost 3 of the houses last week. Foreclosure. The bank seized them when we missed the 3rd mortgage payment." His voice was steady now. The calm that comes after panic has burned itself out. "Kinsley hired a lawyer to fight it. But you can't fight math, Mom. You can't argue with numbers that don't add up." "What about the other 4 properties?" "We're selling them. Fire sale prices, because everyone knows we're desperate. We'll be lucky to walk away with enough to pay off the remaining mortgages and the credit card debt." He paused, and I heard the sound of traffic in the background, the city waking up around my son's financial catastrophe. "The lawyer says we might clear $200,000 after everything's settled, if we're lucky." $200,000 from an inheritance that had seemed worth tens of millions just 4 months ago. James's brutal mathematics had played out exactly as he'd calculated. "And Kinsley?" "Kinsley," Dean's voice broke slightly. "Kinsley filed for divorce yesterday. Her lawyer is demanding half of whatever's left after the bankruptcy, plus alimony, plus she wants me to assume responsibility for all the debt she accumulated, trying to maximize our lifestyle potential." I closed my eyes, feeling grief for my son's pain and recognition that this moment had been inevitable from the first day Kinsley had celebrated inheriting 7 mansions without understanding their true cost. "Dean, where are you staying?" "Extended stay hotel near the airport. It's cheap, and they don't ask many questions when you pay cash." His laugh was bitter. "Amazing how fast your social circle disappears when they realize you can't afford to split the check at the restaurants they like." "Son, I'm coming to get you." "Mom, no. I appreciate the offer, but I need to handle this myself. I need to figure out how to rebuild from whatever's left after the lawyers finish picking through the wreckage." "You don't have to rebuild alone." "Yes, I do. Because if I don't learn how to stand on my own 2 feet now, I'll never learn." His voice was getting stronger, more determined. "I've spent 40 years having other people solve my problems for me. Dad with money, Kinsley with decisions, you with advice I was too stupid to take. This is my mess, and I need to be the one who cleans it up." I felt a surge of pride for my son, recognizing in his words the first evidence of the man James had hoped he could become. But I also felt the weight of the sealed envelope in my jewelry drawer, the key that could solve every problem Dean was facing if I chose to reveal James's final gift. "Dean, what if I told you that your father anticipated this moment, that he had plans in place to help you rebuild when you were ready to learn from what happened?" I'd say that Dad was a lot smarter than his son, and that whatever help he arranged, I probably don't deserve it after the choices I've made. "What if I told you that you do deserve it? That everything that's happened was designed to teach you lessons you needed to learn?" "Mom, what are you talking about?" I thought about James's letter, his careful explanation of controlled education and necessary consequences, about the warehouse in Mississippi that Dean still believed was worthless, about the corporate contracts that could provide financial security for the rest of his life, about the plan that required Dean to lose everything before he could appreciate what real wealth actually meant. "I'm talking about coming home, sweetheart. Not to Memphis, not to your old life, but to Mississippi, to the warehouse that everyone thinks is worthless." "The warehouse?" "Mom, I don't understand." "Pack whatever fits in your car and drive to Yazoo City. There's something I need to show you. Something your father left that you're not going to understand until you see it with your own eyes." "Is this about that warehouse Dad left you?" "Mom, I know you're trying to help, but I can't accept charity from you too. I've already cost my family enough." "It's not charity, Dean. It's education. The final lesson your father designed for you. but you had to earn the right to learn it. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen waiting for sunrise and thinking about the difference between rescuing someone and teaching them to rescue themselves, between enabling weakness and rewarding growth, between helping someone avoid consequences and helping them learn from consequences they'd already survived. At 8 a.m., I drove to First National Bank of Yazoo City and opened the safety deposit box that contained James's final surprise. The corporate contracts, the geological surveys, the bottle of champagne he'd been saving for this moment. Everything was exactly where he'd promised it would be. I also found something he hadn't mentioned in his letter, a deed transferring half ownership of the warehouse property to Dean, with a note explaining the corporate structure that would make him an equal partner in the water rights operation. James hadn't just planned to catch our son when he fell. He'd planned to give him the tools to build something sustainable from the wreckage of his Miami dreams, but only after Dean had learned the difference between inherited wealth and earned wisdom. Dean arrived that evening, driving a 10-year-old Toyota with everything he owned packed into the back seat. He looked older, thinner, worn down by months of financial pressure and social humiliation. But there was something different in his posture, something that suggested he'd lost more than money in Miami. He'd lost illusions about himself and the world that had been both limiting and protective. "Mom, this place looks exactly the same as when I was a kid." "Some things don't need to change, sweetheart. They just need to be appreciated for what they actually are instead of what they appear to be." I led him inside the warehouse, to the conference table where I'd spread out all the documents James had left. The water rights assessments, the corporate contracts, the financial projections that showed sustainable wealth instead of flashy debt. "Dean, your father left you something much more valuable than 7 Miami mansions. He left you the opportunity to build real wealth based on renewable resources and sound business principles." I watched my son's face as he processed the geological surveys, the corporate agreements, the mathematical proof that the warehouse he'd always considered worthless was actually the foundation for generational wealth. "He knew," Dean whispered, his voice filled with awe and something that might have been grief. "He knew I'd lose everything in Miami. He knew Kinsley would leave. He knew I'd end up here, broke and desperate, and finally ready to listen. He knew you needed to learn the difference between wealth and debt, between someone who loved you and someone who loved your money, between building something lasting and buying something impressive. And he knew you'd be here to catch me when I fell. We're going to catch each other, sweetheart. Partners in something your father built, but we're going to develop together. Something based on character instead of inheritance, on sustainable resources instead of leveraged dreams." That night, Dean and I opened James's champagne and toasted the beginning of a partnership that would honor everything valuable about the Monroe legacy, while abandoning everything that had been destroying it from within. Some educations, I was learning, were worth the price of losing everything you thought you wanted, and some inheritances were worth waiting 40 years to receive. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated warehouse office, watching Dean review quarterly royalty reports with the focused attention of someone who'd learned the hard way to understand every number that appeared on a financial statement. The corporate contracts were generating exactly what James had projected, $2.3 million every 3 months, with automatic escalation clauses that would increase payments as extraction volumes grew. "Nestlé wants to expand their operation by 40%. Dean said, looking up from the Coca-Cola quarterly assessment. "They're projecting demand increases that would bump our licensing fees to $3.2 million per quarter within 18 months. What do you think?" "I think we need to study the environmental impact projections before we agree to any extraction increases. Sustainable income only works if the resource remains sustainable." He gestured toward the geological surveys spread across his desk. "The aquifer can handle increased extraction, but we need to make sure we're not sacrificing long-term stability for short-term profits." I smiled, recognizing in Dean's careful analysis the engineering mindset that valued substance over appearance, sustainability over maximum exploitation. James would have been proud to see our son applying lessons learned through financial catastrophe to business decisions that would affect generations. The warehouse had been transformed over the past months from abandoned storage space into a functioning corporate headquarters. Not luxurious, we'd deliberately chosen efficiency over impression, but professional, comfortable, and designed to accommodate growth. Dean had moved into a small apartment above the office, embracing the simplicity of a life built around work that mattered rather than lifestyle that impressed people. "There's something else," Dean said, pulling out a letter marked with a return address I didn't recognize. "I got this yesterday, from Kinsley's divorce attorney." I felt my stomach tighten. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, with Kinsley receiving half of the proceeds from the Miami house sales, roughly $180,000 after legal fees and debt settlement. She'd moved back to Atlanta, taken a job with an event planning company, and disappeared from our lives with the efficient thoroughness of someone cutting ties with a failed investment. What does she want now? She's found out about the warehouse income. Apparently, she hired a private investigator to research my current financial situation, probably thinking I'd hidden assets during the divorce proceedings. Dean's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension around his eyes. Her lawyer is claiming that I committed fraud by concealing the water rights operation from the divorce court. You didn't know about the water rights during the divorce. I know that. You know that. But her lawyer is arguing that James must have told me about the potential income, that I deliberately hid community assets to avoid sharing them in the settlement. I thought about the carefully orchestrated timeline of James's plan, the sealed letters and safety deposit boxes that had ensured Dean couldn't learn about his inheritance until after he'd lost everything he'd thought he wanted. James had protected our son not just from premature wealth, but from having that wealth claimed by someone who'd never earned the right to it. "Dean, what does your attorney say?" "He says we have ironclad documentation, proving I had no knowledge of the water rights until after the divorce was final. The bank records show, when I first accessed the safety deposit box, the geological surveys are all dated after Kinsley left, and the corporate contracts weren't activated until I became a legal partner in the operation." Dean's smile was grim but satisfied. Turns out Dad's obsession with documentation and legal precision worked in our favor. And Kinsley's financial situation? According to what her lawyer let slip, she's struggling. The event planning job doesn't pay much, and apparently she's been living beyond her means, expecting to find another wealthy boyfriend who could support the lifestyle she'd gotten used to. Dean shook his head. She's 35 years old, and she still thinks someone else should fund her dreams. My phone rang. Patricia Hennings, the environmental lawyer who'd been helping us navigate the complex regulations around groundwater extraction rights. "Ella, I have news about the federal environmental protection designation you applied for." "Good news or complicated news?" "Excellent news. The EPA has approved your application to designate the aquifer as a protected water source under federal conservation guidelines. This gives you additional legal protections against over-extraction and ensures the resource will be preserved for future generations." After I hung up, Dean looked at me with the expression of someone still learning to process good news after months of financial disaster. "Federal protection status? It means that no one can ever exploit this resource irresponsibly. It means the income we're generating will be sustainable for our children and grandchildren, assuming you ever have any." I paused, studying his face. "Dean, have you thought about what you want your life to look like going forward? You mean beyond rebuilding my credit and learning how to live on a budget? I mean beyond survival, beyond just cleaning up the mess from Miami. What do you actually want to build with this opportunity?" Dean was quiet for a long time, looking out the warehouse windows at the Mississippi Delta landscape that had seemed unremarkable when we were children, but now represented security and possibility. "I want to build something that matters," he said finally. "Not just financial security, but something that contributes to the community, that creates opportunities for other people." He gestured toward the small town visible in the distance. Yazoo City has been struggling for decades. Young people leave because there aren't enough good jobs, businesses close because there isn't enough economic activity. What if we used some of our income to change that? What did you have in mind? Technical training programs, apprenticeships with local businesses, maybe a small business incubator that helps people start sustainable enterprises instead of depending on outside investment that might disappear. His voice was getting more animated as he developed the idea. We could create a model for rural economic development that other communities could replicate. I felt something warm settle in my chest, not just pride in Dean's vision, but recognition that James's brutal education had accomplished exactly what he'd hoped. Our son had learned to think about wealth as responsibility rather than privilege, as an opportunity to contribute rather than a license to consume. "There's something else I want to discuss," Dean said, pulling out a folder I hadn't seen before. "I've been working with an architect on plans for the property, not just the warehouse, but the whole 40 acres. The plans were beautiful and practical. The warehouse expanded into a community center with meeting spaces and training facilities. The surrounding land developed with small cottages for visiting instructors and temporary housing for people participating in training programs, a design that honored the rural character of the area while creating infrastructure for economic growth. Dean, this is remarkable. It's what Dad would have wanted. Not just wealth preservation, but wealth utilization, using resources to create opportunities instead of just accumulating assets. How much would all of this cost? About $6 million for the full development, spread over 3 years. But the community impact would be worth far more than the investment." Dean's expression was serious, determined. "Mom, I want to do this right. I want to build something that honors everything Dad taught me, including the lessons I had to learn the hard way." That evening, as Dean worked late on development plans and corporate partnership proposals, I walked the property thinking about inheritance and education, about the difference between gifts and lessons, about the strange mathematics of love that sometimes required destroying everything someone thought they wanted in order to give them what they actually needed. Somewhere in Atlanta, Kinsley was probably calculating legal strategies for claiming money she'd never earned from resources she'd never valued. But here in Mississippi, Dean was designing a future based on sustainable wealth and community contribution, proving that James's faith in our son's eventual character had been justified. Some lessons, I realized, were worth the price of losing 7 mansions to learn. And some inheritances were worth more than money. They were worth becoming the kind of person who deserved them. James would have been proud to see our son finally understanding the difference. 2 years later, I stood beside Dean on the front porch of what had once been an abandoned warehouse, watching a group of young adults celebrate their graduation from the Delta Technical Training Institute with the kind of joy that comes from earning something valuable through honest work. The ceremony had been simple but meaningful. 23 graduates receiving certifications in sustainable agriculture, water management, and renewable energy systems. Skills that would keep them in Mississippi instead of driving them to Atlanta or Memphis in search of opportunities that didn't exist in their hometown. Maya Johnson got the job with the Agricultural Extension Service, Dean said, watching a young woman in her early 20s hug her parents while clutching her certificate like a diploma. Full benefits, $48,000 a year starting salary, working on sustainable farming initiatives throughout the Delta. And Marcus Williams? Starting his own solar installation business. We're providing the initial capital through the Small Business Incubator, and he's already got contracts lined up for 6 months. Dean's smile was proud, but not possessive. The expression of someone who'd learned to find satisfaction in other people's success, rather than just his own accumulation. The property had been transformed beyond anything I'd imagined when Dean had first shown me his architectural plans. The warehouse now housed classrooms, laboratories, and workshop spaces that hummed with the energy of people learning skills that would change their lives. The surrounding cottages provided temporary housing for instructors and students from other rural communities who came to study our model for economic development. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't architectural, it was personal. Dean had become the man James had always believed he could be, given the right circumstances and sufficient motivation. He moved through the world now with the quiet confidence that comes from building something meaningful rather than inheriting something impressive. He understood money as a tool rather than a trophy, wealth as responsibility rather than privilege. "There's something I want to show you," Dean said, pulling out an envelope marked with familiar handwriting. "This came yesterday." The return address was from a women's correctional facility in Georgia. Kinsley's name was printed in the corner, and my heart clenched with unexpected sympathy for whatever circumstances had led my former daughter-in-law to prison. What happened to her? Wire fraud. She convinced 3 elderly investors to put money into a fake real estate development scheme, promising them luxury vacation properties that didn't exist. Dean's voice was careful, controlled. She got 18 months and full restitution requirements. I thought about the woman who'd celebrated inheriting 7 Miami mansions with such theatrical enthusiasm. who'd spent money like someone who'd never learned the difference between assets and liabilities, who'd treated marriage like a business acquisition and family like a networking opportunity. What does she want? To apologize and to ask if we'd consider hiring her for the re-entry program we're starting next month. The re-entry program, another expansion of Dean's vision for community development, providing job training and transitional support for people leaving the criminal justice system, helping them rebuild their lives through honest work and genuine skill development. Do you want to hire her? I want to do what's right, not what feels good, not what provides emotional satisfaction, but what's actually right for everyone involved. Dean looked out at the community we'd built, at the gardens where former students were growing food for the local farmers market, at the workshop where current students were building furniture that would be sold to fund future expansion. And what do you think is right? I think Kinsley needs to learn the same lessons I had to learn. That security comes from what you build, not what you inherit. That respect comes from contribution, not consumption. That real wealth means having something valuable to offer other people. And you think she's ready to learn those lessons? I think she's finally desperate enough to consider learning them. Prison has a way of clarifying priorities that 7 Miami mansions couldn't provide. I read Kinsley's letter while Dean continued explaining his thoughts about the re-entry program. Her handwriting was different, smaller, more careful, lacking the confident loops and flourishes that had characterized her signature on credit card receipts and mortgage documents. Dean, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you or your family, but I'm hoping you might consider giving me the chance to earn forgiveness rather than just requesting it. I've spent 2 years thinking about the choices I made, the person I became, the way I treated people who deserved better from me. I understand now that I was never really married to you. I was married to an idea of what your family could provide for me. I understand that I treated your mother like an obstacle rather than recognizing her as someone who'd spent her life building the kind of character I'd never bothered to develop. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm hoping for the opportunity to prove that prison taught me something about the difference between wanting things and earning things. If you have any place in your programs for someone who needs to learn how to contribute instead of just consume, I'd be grateful for the chance. I know you're building something important in Mississippi. I've been following the news coverage of your community development work, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished, even though I have no right to feel proud of someone whose success I tried to undermine. Whether you decide to help me or not, I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for the legal problems I caused, but for the years I wasted trying to be someone else's idea of successful instead of learning what success actually means. Sincerely, Kinsley. I folded the letter and handed it back to Dean, thinking about redemption and second chances, about the difference between punishment and education, about the strange ways that consequences could sometimes lead to genuine growth. What will you tell her? That she can apply for the program like everyone else, that her past mistakes won't disqualify her, but they won't give her special consideration either, that if she's accepted, she'll start at the bottom and work her way up based on effort and contribution, not history or connections. And if she succeeds, then she'll prove that people can change when they're finally ready to do the work. And if she fails, she'll prove that some people are more interested in appearing reformed than actually becoming reformed. As the afternoon wound down and the last of the graduation celebration was cleaned up, Dean and I walked through the property that had become our shared life's work. The Technical Institute was thriving. The small business incubator had helped launch 17 successful enterprises, and applications were coming in from rural communities across the South wanting to replicate our model. Dean, do you ever regret losing the Miami houses? Every day, he said without hesitation. I regret the embarrassment, the financial devastation, the public humiliation of failing so spectacularly at something everyone expected me to succeed at. But I don't regret learning what I learned. I don't regret discovering what I'm actually capable of building when I stopped trying to maintain what someone else built for me. He gestured toward the institute, the workshops, the gardens where young people were learning to grow food and hope simultaneously. I don't regret finding out that Dad loved me enough to let me fail at maintaining his legacy so I could succeed at creating my own. As the sun set over the Mississippi Delta, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise, I thought about James and his elaborate plan to save our son through controlled destruction, about the difference between gifts and education, about the mathematics of love that sometimes required losing everything you thought you wanted in order to discover what you actually needed. Dean was right. Some lessons were worth the price of 7 Miami mansions, and some inheritances were worth more than money, more than property, more than anything that could be calculated on a balance sheet. Ella, there's something I need to tell you, Dean said, as we reached the porch where this whole journey had begun with a warehouse that everyone thought was worthless. What's that, sweetheart? Thank you for catching me when I fell, for helping me understand that Dad's gift wasn't the Miami houses or even the warehouse. It was the chance to become someone who deserved what he was really trying to give me. And what was he trying to give you? Dean smiled, looking out at the community we'd built together, at the evidence of lives changed through honest work and genuine opportunity. The satisfaction of building something that matters, the security of knowing it's sustainable, and the wisdom to understand that real wealth isn't about what you inherit, it's about what you do with whatever chances you're given to prove who you really are. I squeezed my son's hand, feeling the calluses he'd earned through 2 years of physical work and community building, thinking about the man he'd become when everything he'd thought he wanted had been stripped away. Your father would be proud, I said. I hope so. But Mom? Yes, I'm finally proud too. Not of what I inherited, but of what I built after I lost it all and found out what I was really made of. Outside, the Mississippi Delta stretched toward horizons that held nothing but possibility, and I realized that some gifts were worth waiting a lifetime to receive. Pride doesn't come from what you inherit, son. It comes from what you build after everything falls apart, and you choose to rebuild with your own hands, your own character, and your own understanding of what actually matters. The end.
Trước khi khép lại câu chuyện này, mình muốn bạn ở lại với mình thêm một chút, như một cuộc trò chuyện thực sự, không vội vàng, không kịch bản. Đôi khi mình nghĩ điều đặc biệt nhất của những câu chuyện như thế này không phải là cao trào, không phải là cái kết, mà là những cảm xúc còn đọng lại sau khi mọi thứ đã kết thúc. Bạn có bao giờ xem xong một câu chuyện rồi tự nhiên im lặng vài giây không? Không phải vì không có gì để nói, mà là vì có quá nhiều thứ đang chạy trong đầu. Mình thì có. Và mỗi lần như vậy mình lại tự hỏi ngoài kia có bao nhiêu câu chuyện giống như thế này mà chúng ta chưa từng được nghe. Bao nhiêu con người đã trải qua những điều khó khăn như vậy nhưng không có ai kể lại. Bao nhiêu người phụ nữ đã phải mạnh mẽ trong im lặng mà không ai thực sự nhìn thấy. Đó là điều khiến mình luôn suy nghĩ rất nhiều sau mỗi video. Bởi vì sự mạnh mẽ không phải lúc nào cũng ồn ào. Nó không phải lúc nào cũng là những khoảnh khắc đứng trên sân khấu hay những chiến thắng rõ ràng để mọi người vỗ tay. Đôi khi sự mạnh mẽ chỉ đơn giản là thức dậy vào mỗi buổi sáng khi bạn không còn chút năng lượng nào, tiếp tục cố gắng khi mọi thứ dường như đang chống đối lại bạn, mỉm cười dù bên trong bạn đang rất mệt mỏi. Và điều đặc biệt là rất nhiều người phụ nữ ngoài kia đang làm điều đó mỗi ngày. Không ai biết, không ai hỏi, nhưng họ vẫn tiếp tục. Những nhân vật trong câu chuyện bạn vừa xem có thể là hư cấu, nhưng cảm xúc của họ thì không hề hư cấu. Nỗi đau là sự thật, sự tổn thương là thật, và cả sự kiên cường cũng là thật. Đó là lý do tại sao mình luôn muốn kể những câu chuyện như thế này. Không phải để làm mọi thứ trở nên buồn hơn, mà để chúng ta có thể hiểu hơn, hiểu rằng đằng sau mỗi con người là cả một hành trình mà chúng ta không thể nhìn thấy. Hiểu rằng đôi khi sự im lặng của một người không phải là họ yếu đuối, mà là họ đã phải chịu đựng quá nhiều. Và hiểu rằng sự vươn lên không phải lúc nào cũng hoàn hảo. Có những lần họ sẽ gục ngã, có những lúc họ sẽ nghi ngờ chính mình, có những khoảnh khắc họ muốn từ bỏ tất cả. Nhưng rồi họ vẫn đứng dậy, không phải vì họ không sợ, mà là vì họ không còn lựa chọn nào khác ngoài việc phải tiếp tục. Và mình nghĩ đó mới là định nghĩa thực sự của sức mạnh. Không phải là không bao giờ yếu đuối, mà là vẫn bước tiếp, ngay cả khi bạn đang yếu đuối nhất. Có thể khi nghe đến đây, bạn sẽ thấy câu chuyện này không chỉ là về một nhân vật nữa, mà là về rất nhiều con người. Có thể là một người bạn của bạn, một người thân trong gia đình, hoặc thậm chí là chính bạn. Và nếu bạn từng trải qua những cảm xúc tương tự, thì mình muốn bạn biết một điều: bạn không hề đơn độc. Có thể câu chuyện của bạn chưa được kể, có thể không ai thực sự hiểu hết những gì bạn đã đi qua, nhưng điều đó không làm cho những gì bạn trải qua trở nên ít quan trọng hơn. Ngược lại, nó càng cho thấy bạn đã mạnh mẽ như thế nào để đi đến đây. Và đó cũng là lý do mình luôn hy vọng khi bạn xem được những video này, bạn không chỉ xem để giải trí, mà bạn sẽ cảm nhận, bạn sẽ dừng lại một chút để nghĩ, để nhìn mọi thứ chậm lại, để hiểu hơn về con người và về chính mình. Bởi vì đôi khi một câu chuyện có thể không thay đổi cả thế giới, nhưng nó có thể thay đổi cách bạn nhìn nhận về thế giới. Và như thế đã là rất đủ rồi. Nếu bạn đã đi cùng mình đến tận đây, thật sự mình rất trân trọng điều đó. Không phải ai cũng có đủ kiên nhẫn để lắng nghe đến tận giây phút cuối cùng. Và việc bạn vẫn ở đây có nghĩa là câu chuyện này đã chạm đến bạn, dù chỉ một chút. Nếu bạn muốn, bạn có thể tiếp tục đồng hành cùng mình trong những video tiếp theo. Vẫn sẽ là những câu chuyện như thế này. Những câu chuyện có thể sẽ khiến bạn suy nghĩ nhiều hơn, có thể khiến bạn cảm thấy nặng lòng, nhưng cũng có thể mang lại cho bạn một góc nhìn khác. Và trước khi kết thúc, mình chỉ muốn nói một điều thôi. Đôi khi cuộc sống sẽ không công bằng, đôi khi mọi thứ sẽ xảy ra theo cách mà bạn không thể kiểm soát. Nhưng điều bạn luôn có thể kiểm soát là việc bạn chọn đứng dậy như thế nào sau tất cả. Dù chậm cũng được, dù mệt cũng được, chỉ cần bạn vẫn bước tiếp thì bạn đã mạnh mẽ hơn bạn nghĩ rất nhiều rồi. Cảm ơn vì các bạn đã ở đây, đã lắng nghe và đã cùng mình đi qua những câu chuyện này. Hẹn gặp lại các bạn trong những câu chuyện tiếp theo. Bye!